Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring the architecture of love, a really transformative concept straight out of the Bible. Now, especially within Reformed Calvinism, we place a massive emphasis on the sovereignty of God and the incredible power of the gospel of grace. But a super fascinating question pops up when we start diving into these massive theological truths. What happens when our head knowledge totally outpaces our heart for other people? Today, we're going to summarize the key findings of this Daily Bread research on 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and figure out how we can actually build up the people around us rather than just inflating our own egos.
Let's start right at the foundation. 1 Corinthians 8:9 says, "Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak." This single sentence perfectly hooks us into the central tension of our entire explainer. On one hand, you have legitimate personal freedom, rights granted by the gospel. But on the other hand, you have this immense responsibility to care for the spiritual growth of the people around you. It's quite the balancing act.
So, here's our big picture roadmap for today. We'll look at the core Bible verses, the historical context in Corinth, knowledge versus love, freedom and stumbling blocks, practical steps for students, and finally, our conclusion.
Section 1. Historical Context. The Corinthian Church.
Okay, to really grasp this, we need to step back into the ancient city of Corinth. It's kind of surprising, but the Corinthians actually didn't lack knowledge. They were highly educated in their theology. In Corinth, meat was constantly sacrificed to pagan idols before it was sold in the market. Now, the strong Christians in the church knew that since God is completely sovereign, those false idols were literally nothing. So eating the food, theologically harmless. And honestly, Paul completely agrees with them. Their theology was spot on. But here's where the whole thing went sideways. They were so incredibly confident in their own spiritual correctness that they used their perfectly accurate theology as a license to do whatever they wanted. They were blatantly ignoring how their actions were absolutely crushing new believers who still felt tied to those old pagan rituals.
Section 2. Knowledge versus love. Two spiritual paths.
This brings us to a really interesting comparison of two totally different approaches to spiritual growth. Think of knowledge on its own like helium. It just produces inflation. It puffs you up with this sense of superiority, making you feel bigger and smarter than everyone else in the room. It leads straight to an unseen spiritual arrogance. But on the flip side, we have love. True Christian love acts like a foundation. It actually builds others up. It produces genuine humility, because your focus shifts entirely to the welfare of the person sitting right next to you. In a Reformed understanding of God, seeing the Father's immense holiness should naturally produce humility, not pride. The clearer you see Him, the clearer you see your own deep need. So, the question isn't really how much theology you know, but what you're going to do with it for the people around you.
Section 3. Stumbling Blocks. Freedom and Responsibility. So, what exactly is a stumbling block? We need to define our terms here. A stumbling block isn't just doing something evil. It's exercising a completely legitimate personal freedom or right, but doing it in a way that causes a growing brother or sister to stumble and go against their own conscience. Notice that Paul isn't telling the Corinthians their theology is wrong. He absolutely affirms that their freedom is real, but he warns that if exercising that perfectly valid freedom damages the faith of a weaker individual, you've essentially taken a good thing and turned it into a weapon.
Let's look at the real-world implications of this for college students and spiritual leaders today. You might not be arguing over idolmate, but the principle is exactly the same. During the summer, college students hit up boot camps, theological retreats, and intense Bible studies. And that's fantastic. But here is the hidden danger. Fast knowledge growth without equal growth in love creates a kind of spiritual arrogance that's super hard to spot in yourself. Younger students are constantly watching you. They're watching how you talk about others, how you handle church drama, and how you deal with disagreements. You have to use your maturity to build them up, not tear them down. In any gray area, the core question isn't, do I have the right to do this? But rather, what is the loving response here?
Section 1. Practical steps. Living it out.
All right, let's get super practical. Here's a clear, 3-step process to make sure your knowledge is actually serving others. Step 1. Evaluate your studies honestly. Ask yourself, do these Bible studies produce a deeper love for people, or just a smug confidence in myself? Step 2. Make sure your spiritual growth shows up practically. The true test of your theology is how you treat people every single day, not just how well you can win a debate. And step 3. Pray and be willing to voluntarily limit your freedom. Ask God to give you the grace to restrict your own legitimate rights if it means protecting a weaker brother or sister. It's not about following arbitrary rules. It's about choosing sacrifice out of deep love.
Section 2. Conclusion. Let love build up.
The ultimate goal of knowing the Bible is never just data collection. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Look closely at your own life and your own community today. Is there any area where your freedom or your rights might actually be a stumbling block to someone who is still growing? What would voluntary restriction actually look like for you, and what would it cost you to give it up? The Apostle Paul said he would give up eating meat forever if it meant keeping a fellow believer from stumbling. That is the true architecture of love. Let's let our knowledge genuinely build up the people around us. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I challenge you to put this into practice today.